A different time. A different king.
I'm Alex Berman, and you're watching Selling Breakdowns. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at two things, which at first glance may appear extremely unrelated, yet under a more analytical approach, we can identify clear lessons to be learned. These two things are the concept of competition and whether or not it's beneficial for businesses, and HBO's Emmy award-winning TV show Game of Thrones. Before we begin, it's important to note that this is not saying that Game of Thrones is a show about business, because it's not. It's a show about war, dragons, and full-frontal nudity, yet there are lessons to be learned from it which can be applied to both business and life. For as long as people have been running businesses, people have been in competition, trying to attract more customers and clients than their rivals, and ultimately making more money. But of course, competition didn't start as a concept in business, but instead in ancient sport and battles for power. In fact, you can trace competition as far back as the start of life on planet Earth, with evolution and natural selection being a form of competition in itself. Although the idea of competition has changed a lot now, with people competing in slightly less dangerous circumstances, it still affects a lot of the modern world. In HBO's television series Game of Thrones, we see various houses in a medieval fantasy world battle it out for the power of the Iron Throne. These houses inhabit the continent of Westeros, a fictional land of harsh winters, magical creatures, and power-hungry characters. Competition exists in Game of Thrones, but it's not the kind of competition that we see in business, where companies compete against one another to secure the loyalty of clients and customers, but it's the sort of competition that we see in modern-day politics and historical power struggles. The ultimate goal for nearly all the characters in Game of Thrones is the Iron Throne. To discover whether or not competition is beneficial, whether it be in Game of Thrones or real life, we're going to look at several key events from the show and how these go to support the argument. In Season 1, the execution of Eddard Stark by the Lannisters is the start of a massive chain reaction which leads to all the events that happen later on in the show. Without Ned's death, there may not have been a war at all, meaning that many of the characters that died would not have, and Westeros would have been a much happier place. The War of the Five Kings is the war of succession that takes place after the death of Robert Baratheon. During this war, all the different sides are constantly looking for ways to better themselves and improve the quality of their armies and the size of their chances of victory. Stannis Baratheon greatly benefits from the assistance of Melisandre, the Red Priestess, and Daenerys even comes away with an unsullied army and 3 dragons to fly by her side. There are a number of alliances and agreements which only come around in the need for certain houses to increase their chances of success. A good example of this is when Viserys arranges the marriage of Daenerys to Khal Drogo so that they can obtain the assistance of the Dothraki to invade Westeros. Now we're going to take a look at how we can apply lessons learned from these examples to real life, and establish how competition can be beneficial for business. First is the concept of action and reaction. Similar to how the Targaryens enlisted the assistance of the Dothraki, competition encourages businesses to take risks and broker deals and agreements in order to get ahead. If a business which, let's say for example, manufacture and sell laptops and desktop computers, see that a rival company is beginning to perform better, they'll look to the individual companies that manufacture graphics cards, hard drives, and other key components. This may lead to a company coming to an agreement with a company like Nvidia, for example, to produce the graphics cards for their business and their business only. This is a great example of how competition and exclusivity agreements can lead to more success. Another, this time real-life example, is how game console manufacturers like Sony and Microsoft look to companies who make games to bring exclusives to their consoles. Notable examples are the agreements between Naughty Dog and Sony, which brought hit games like Uncharted and The Last of Us exclusively to PlayStation consoles, therefore encouraging people who are torn between PlayStation and Xbox to choose to buy the latest Sony console. However, this also has its negatives. Now we're going to take a closer look at some of the negatives that competition brings to Game of Thrones, leaving the obvious murder and betrayal aside, as these rarely have any place in the modern business world. Individuals putting aside what is best for the people in order to gain power for themselves. Cersei Lannister, for example, doesn't put the needs or wants of the people in consideration for a majority of her decisions, simply her desire to see herself and her family hold power. The wishes of King Robert, for Ned to become king after his death, until Joffrey is of the proper age, are deemed irrelevant by Cersei. The hindrance of progress development and the ignoring of what is best for the greater good. Instead of seeking ways for the houses to work together against the threat of the White Walkers, they ignore this and focus on the petty war between them instead. Now, let's take a look at how this applies to real-world scenarios. First is the increasing attitude of businesses to put their profits and pleasing shareholders above the interests of customers and clients. The age-old idea of the customer is always right is being replaced by the idea that the shareholder takes priority. Due to the nature of competition, where making money and raking in large profits is the aim, customers are faced with higher prices and employees are faced with wages that don't increase to match the inflation of the economy. There's another huge problem with too much competition in business that we can learn from Game of Thrones. This is when businesses ignore what's best for industry progress and instead pursue selfish goals. Competition can be good, but a lack of cooperation can prove to be a huge negative. Imagine how much easier life would be for the characters in Game of Thrones if all of the major characters had banded together to fight the threat of the White Walkers before they managed to raise an entire army of the dead to fight for them. As we attempt to establish whether or not competition is good for business based on principles and concepts that we learned from HBO's Game of Thrones, there are a number of things that we need to take into consideration. First are the advantages we discussed. Competition leads to a general desire for the houses to be better than one another, and thus can be seen as a parallel to businesses and companies increasing the quality of their products or services in order to be the best in the market. This may include alliances and agreements being formed in order to add strength and quality to what they have to offer. Yet, like most things in business, competition has its drawbacks. It can lead to a clouding of the intended aims of a product, whether it be to please the shareholders of a company or benefit a customer as best it can, which should be the true target. It can also lead to a general slowing down of progress, with companies too preoccupied with fighting against one another. However, all in all, competition is good for business, as it's helpful for the houses in Game of Thrones. In business, like life in general, there really is no pain, no gain, and it may take a collection of small losses and drawbacks in order to reap the benefits in the long run. For more videos like this one, focusing on pop culture and the business lessons we can learn from it, be sure to subscribe, and let us know your thoughts on the topic. Is competition good for business? I'm Alex Berman.